The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue had never looked so sharp on a Tuesday morning. Crystal chandeliers, pressed white tablecloths, 43 men and women in tailored suits seated around a conference table that cost more than most people's annual salary. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan moved the way it always did, fast, indifferent, relentless. And at the head of that table sat Marcus Hargrove. He was wearing the navy Brioni suit Elise had picked out for him 3 Christmases ago. His tie was straight, his jaw was set. He looked like everything he had always wanted people to believe he was, a man who had built something real, something his own, something no one could touch. He placed his left hand flat on the table, no wedding ring. The chair beside him, the one that had been left conspicuously empty when the meeting began, was no longer empty. A woman in a red Valentino dress slid into it at 9:17 a.m. She carried a leather portfolio embossed with the initials DR. She smiled at the room like she had always belonged in it, like she had earned her seat. Her name was Diane Reeves, 29 years old. Until 8 months ago, she had been a paralegal at Hargrove Consulting's legal department. Nobody in the room said anything. 43 people looked at the woman in the red dress. Then they looked at the door. Then back at Marcus. Because they all knew, every single person in that room knew, that Marcus Hargrove had a wife. A quiet woman who had given him 9 years, 2 sons, and a life she had deliberately made small so his could be large. Her name was Elise. And at that exact moment, at 9:17 a.m. on December 12th, Elise Hargrove was standing in the lobby downstairs. She had 2 boys with her, 7-year-old Noah and 5-year-old Caleb. She was carrying a paper bag of cinnamon rolls from the Sarabeths around the corner because Marcus had texted her 2 days ago, "Come by Tuesday morning, bring the boys, big day." She had thought he wanted to share a moment with his family. She had thought wrong. The security guard at the front desk looked at her with something that was not quite pity and not quite indifference. He checked his screen, he checked it again. Then he looked up and said quietly, carefully, "I'm sorry, Mum. Mr. Hargrove has left strict instructions. Your name is not on the list." Noah looked up at his mother. Caleb held his paper bag of cinnamon rolls. Elise didn't argue. She didn't cry. She turned around, took her son's hands, and walked back out through the revolving glass doors into the December cold. And that was the moment something shifted in her chest. Broke. Shifted. Like a door she had kept locked for 9 years was finally, quietly, beginning to open. Before Marcus, there was Raymond Caldwell's daughter. That was how people in Boston referred to her. Not by name, not by accomplishment, but by lineage. Raymond Caldwell's daughter, the quiet one. The one who had gone to Harvard Law and then, inexplicably, walked away from a future that could have reshaped entire industries. Her professors had called it a waste. Her father had called it a rebellion. Elise had called it a choice. She had graduated 3rd in her class at Harvard Law in May 2014. She had the offers, Sullivan and Cromwell, Skadden, 2 federal clerkships. She turned them all down, not because she was afraid, because at 24 she had already spent her entire life living inside someone else's blueprint, and she wanted, just once, to draw her own. She met Marcus Hargrove at a gallery opening in Cambridge that September. He was 32, newly incorporated, running a 2-person consulting firm out of a shared office on Newbury Street. He had no family money, no connections, no safety net. He had a handshake that meant something and a way of talking about the future that made it sound like it was already happening. Elise had never met anyone like him. She had grown up around men who inherited their confidence. Marcus had built his from scratch. She fell in love with that. She fell in love with him. They married in June 2015 in a small ceremony in Greenwich. Her father attended but said little. He had run a background check on Marcus 6 months before the wedding and said nothing about what he found, not then. Raymond Caldwell expressed disapproval the way he expressed everything else, through silence and patience, waiting for time to prove him right. Elise chose not to practice law. She taught 3rd grade at PS 163 on the Upper West Side, the school 2 blocks from the apartment she and Marcus shared on Riverside Drive. She loved her students. She loved the smallness of her days. She had deliberately kept her maiden name off her classroom door, off their mailbox, off everything. She wanted to be Elise Hargrove, a teacher, a mother, a wife, not a Caldwell. For 9 years she made herself invisible to protect something she believed in. What she didn't know was that Marcus had spent those same 9 years learning exactly how invisible she was, and calculating, very carefully, what he could do because of it. Hargrove Consulting had grown the way ambitious things grow, fast, loud, and with a hunger that was never quite satisfied. By 2020, 5 years into their marriage, Marcus had 17 employees and a client list that included 3 Fortune 500 companies. By 2022, he had 41 employees, an office on Park Avenue, and a name that meant something in the rooms that mattered. By the fall of 2023, Hargrove Consulting was worth $80 million on paper, and Marcus was in active negotiations to sell to Meridian Group, a Chicago-based conglomerate that wanted a New York foothold, for $120 million in cash. He had built something real. That part was undeniable. What was also undeniable, though nobody in his professional circles said it aloud, was that the climb had cost him something. Not money, not ambition, something quieter. The version of Marcus who had shaken Elise's hand at that gallery in Cambridge and talked about the future like it was a living thing, that man had slowly, incrementally, been replaced by someone who measured every relationship in the room by what it could produce. Diane Reeves had joined Hargrove Consulting in April 2023 as a paralegal on a 6-month contract. By June, she was handling his calendar. By August, she was traveling with him to client meetings in Chicago, Houston, and Dallas. By October, Marcus had quietly opened a joint investment account in Delaware, registered under a shell company called HRG Ventures LLC, and moved $2.4 million of Hargrove Consulting's operating capital into it. The account had 2 authorized signatories, Marcus Hargrove and Diane Reeves. He had also, in August, used Elise's name to co-sign a $1.8 million line of credit from First Continental Bank. Elise had signed the document without reading it thoroughly. She trusted him completely. She had always trusted him completely. The funds were drawn the following week and transferred to HRG Ventures LLC. Marcus told himself it was a business strategy, a restructure, a way to protect assets during the Meridian negotiation. He was not wrong about the strategy. He was catastrophically wrong about one thing. He had forgotten, or perhaps chosen to forget, that the woman whose name he had signed without her full understanding had graduated 3rd in her class from Harvard Law. She had never practiced, but she had never forgotten a single thing she had learned. It started with a receipt, not a text message, not a discovered phone, not a photograph or a perfume or a lipstick mark. A receipt from Smith & Walensky on 49th Street, printed on paper so thin it had nearly disintegrated in the pocket of Marcus's winter coat when Elise found it while putting his clothes away on the evening of November 3rd. Dinner for 2. $387. A bottle of Opus 1. The wine Marcus always said was too expensive for Tuesdays. He had charged it to a platinum Amex card whose number Elise didn't recognize. She folded the receipt and placed it in the back of her desk drawer. She said nothing. She began to look. A woman who had spent 9 years deliberately not using her legal education is still a woman who has it. Elise had not forgotten how to read a financial document. She had not forgotten how to search a public business registry. She had not forgotten how to pull a Delaware incorporation, filing or cross-reference a signatory name against a federal tax ID number. It took her 11 days. On November 14th, sitting at the kitchen table at 2:14 a.m. while Noah and Caleb slept down the hall, Elise found HRG Ventures LLC. She found the $2.4 million transfer. She found the co-signatory. She found the First Continental line of credit in her own name. $1.8 million drawn in full, gone. She sat with that information for 3 hours without moving. At 5 a.m. she made coffee. She drank it, standing at the kitchen window, watching the Hudson turn grey in the pre-dawn light. Then she opened her phone and wrote a single text message to a number she had not dialed in 2 years, her father's private line. She wrote, "Dad, I need you to look at something. Please don't do anything yet." Raymond Caldwell read the message at 5:08 a.m. from his study in Greenwich. He had been awake. He was always awake early. He looked at his daughter's text for a long time. Then he typed back 3 words, "Send me everything." She sent him 47 pages of documents over the next hour. Raymond Caldwell read every page, and when he was finished, he did not call his lawyer. He called his accountant, his banker, and a man whose name did not appear on any public record. And he said, very quietly, "Begin." Marcus had not come home the night before. This was not unusual. In the last 4 months, he had been absent from the Riverside Drive apartment 3 or 4 nights a week, always with a reason, always with a text message that arrived just before midnight. Late at the office. "Don't wait up." Elise had stopped waiting up in September. She had started documenting in October. On the morning of December 12th, she woke at 6 a.m., made the boys breakfast, packed Noah's school bag, and found the text Marcus had sent 2 days prior still sitting at the top of her message thread. "Come by Tuesday morning. Bring the boys. Big day." She had not answered it then. She answered it now. She typed, "We'll be there." She hit send. She dressed Noah in his blue parka and Caleb in the puffy red coat he refused to take off, even indoors. She walked them the 6 blocks to Sarah Beth's on Amsterdam Avenue and bought a paper bag of cinnamon rolls, the kind Marcus had loved when they were first married, and used to meet her for Saturday breakfasts before his calendar filled up and Saturdays became like every other day. She was not there to bring him breakfast. She was there because her father had told her the night before on the phone from Greenwich, "Be there at 9:15. Stand where people can see you. Don't go upstairs. Don't make a scene. Just be seen." She had asked him why. He had said, "Because what happens next needs witnesses, and the witnesses need to see what he does to you first." She had not fully understood. She did not need to fully understand. She trusted her father's timing the same way she had once trusted Marcus's plans, with the kind of faith that comes not from naivety, but from watching a person operate long enough to know how they think. Raymond Caldwell had been thinking about this moment for 27 days. Marcus Hargrove had been thinking about nothing except the $120 million that was about to land in an account with Diane Reeves's name on it. At 9:14 a.m., Elise pushed through the revolving glass doors of the building on Park Avenue, Noah's hand in hers, Caleb pressed against her side. At 9:17 a.m., the security guard looked up from his screen and said the words that would cost Marcus Hargrove everything he had ever built. The cold on Park Avenue in December is a specific kind of cold. It comes off the street in waves, channeled between the towers of glass and stone, and it finds the gaps in your coat, the space between your collar and your neck, the place where you stopped paying attention. Elise stood on the sidewalk for 3 minutes after the revolving door stopped moving behind her. She held Noah's hand. Caleb was still holding the paper bag. "Mommy," Caleb said, "are we going up?" "Not today," Elise said. Noah was 7. He looked at her with the particular gravity of a child who has already learned that some questions you do not ask out loud. He tightened his grip on her hand. She stood there and breathed. 1 breath, 2, 3. She had known this would happen. She had been told it would happen. But knowing a thing intellectually and feeling it arrive in your body, in your chest, in the backs of your knees, in the hollow place between your shoulder blades, are 2 entirely different events. She had prepared for the knowledge. She had not fully prepared for the weight of it. 9 years, 2 sons, 47 pages of documents. She had made herself small so he could be large. She had swallowed her education, her name, her inheritance, her future, and folded them into the quiet shape of a woman who wanted nothing more than a real life with a man she believed in. She had been sincere. She had been entirely, completely sincere. And he had used her sincerity as a financial instrument. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "They can see you from the 38th floor. Stay exactly where you are." She looked up at the building. Glass and steel, 40 stories of it, the December sky flat and white behind it. She stood up straighter. She adjusted Caleb's coat. She smoothed Noah's collar. She took both their hands, cinnamon rolls and all, and she stood in the middle of the December cold on Park Avenue, and she did not move, and she did not cry, and she did not look away from the building. 3 black SUVs turned the corner from 57th Street at 9:23 a.m. They moved in formation, unhurried, certain. They stopped at the curb directly in front of her. The first door opened. And the man who stepped out, the man she had not seen in 2 years, was wearing a grey overcoat and carrying a leather briefcase and looking at her with an expression she had never seen on her father's face before. Something that was not power, not strategy, not calculation. Something that looked, unmistakably, like guilt. Raymond Caldwell had not seen his grandson since the previous Christmas. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at them. Noah with his blue parka and serious eyes, Caleb with the paper bag pressed against his chest, and something moved across his face that was too large for the moment and too private for Park Avenue. He blinked it away. He was not a man who allowed himself to be moved in public. He looked at Elise. She looked at him. "Dad," she said. That was all. "I know," he said. 2 men in dark suits had stepped out of the 2nd and 3rd SUVs. They stood at a distance, not bodyguards in the obvious sense, but men who understood how to occupy space in a way that conveyed information without broadcasting it. One of them was carrying a manila folder. Another was speaking quietly into an earpiece. Raymond crouched down to Noah's level. He was 68 years old, with bad knees and a posture that had never fully forgiven him for 40 years of boardroom chairs, and crouching cost him something. He did it anyway. "You must be Noah," he said. "Your Grandpa Raymond," Noah said. "Mom has a picture of you on her phone." "Does she?" He glanced up at Elise. "I didn't know that." "She looks at it sometimes," Noah said, with the devastating accuracy of a 7-year-old. "When she thinks we're asleep." Raymond stood back up. He cleared his throat. He looked at the building. "How long have they been upstairs?" he asked. "Since 9, Elise said. Meridian's team is in the room." Yes. Does Marcus know you're here? He had me turned away at the door, she said, in front of his staff, in front of the boys. Raymond did not respond immediately. He reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded envelope. He held it for a moment, then handed it to the man with the manila folder, who turned and walked toward the building entrance. "What's in the envelope?" Elise asked. "A letter," Raymond said. "To the chairman of First Continental Bank, who happens to be sitting on the 38th floor right now as part of the Meridian acquisition team. We went to Princeton together." Elise understood then what her father had been doing for 27 days. He had not been preparing vengeance. He had been preparing a mirror, and he was about to hold it up in front of Marcus Hargrove in a room full of the only people whose opinion Marcus had ever cared about. The letter was 2 pages, single-spaced, on Caldwell Capital letterhead. It had been drafted by Raymond's legal team and reviewed by 3 separate attorneys over 9 days. It cited specific statute numbers. It attached 8 exhibits. It was written in the careful, bloodless language of financial law, which is to say, it was the most devastating document in the room. It outlined, in precise and irrefutable sequence, the following facts. 1. On August 14, Marcus Hargrove had used his wife Elise Hargrove's legal signature, obtained under false pretense, to secure a $1.8 million line of credit from First Continental Bank. The stated purpose of the credit line was working capital for Hargrove Consulting LLC. The actual destination of the funds was HRG Ventures LLC, a Delaware shell company. 2. HRG Ventures LLC had 2 authorized signatories, Marcus Hargrove and Diane Reeves. Diane Reeves had been simultaneously employed as a staff paralegal at Hargrove Consulting at the time the account was opened, creating a conflict of interest violation under the firm's own operating agreement. 3. The $2.4 million transferred from Hargrove Consulting's operating account to HRG Ventures LLC had been recorded in the firm's internal books as a strategic reserve allocation, a categorization that did not exist in the firm's financial policies and that had not been disclosed to the firm's 2 minority partners, both of whom had signed the Meridian acquisition paperwork in good faith. 4. The proposed $120 million Meridian acquisition had been structured such that 40% of the proceeds would flow through HRG Ventures LLC, an arrangement that was not disclosed in the offering memorandum presented to Meridian Group. The letter closed with 3 words that were not legal language at all. They were personal. Raymond had added them himself by hand at the bottom of the 2nd page. After his attorneys had finished, his wife knew. Those 3 words were not an accusation. They were not a threat. They were a statement of fact that reframed every other fact in the document, because if Elise Hargrove had known, it meant the transaction was potentially fraudulent, and if she had not known, it meant Marcus had committed forgery. Either way, the deal could not close. Upstairs on the 38th floor, a man in a dark suit walked into the boardroom and handed the envelope to the chairman of First Continental Bank. The chairman opened it. He read the first paragraph. He set down his pen. Marcus had been speaking when the envelope arrived. He had been standing at the head of the conference table with his hands on the back of his chair, talking about synergies. The way people in rooms like this always talked about synergies, with confidence and momentum, and the kind of conviction that is really just velocity. The Meridian team was listening. The attorneys were making notes. Diane sat beside his chair with her portfolio open and her expression composed. Then Charles Whitfield, 64 years old, chairman of First Continental Bank, Princeton class of 1983, stopped writing. He had been handed the envelope by a man in a dark suit who walked in without knocking and left the same way. Charles looked at the return address on the envelope. He looked at it for longer than a moment. Then he opened it. The room continued for approximately 90 seconds. Then Charles set down his pen. The sound of a pen being set on a conference table is not loud. It is, objectively, almost nothing. A small plastic click, a slight drag of metal on paper. But in a room where 43 people have spent the last 2 hours moving toward the same destination, the sound of one person stopping carries the weight of everything that was about to happen, and now isn't. Marcus noticed. He stopped mid-sentence. "Charles," he said, "everything okay?" Charles did not answer immediately. He was reading the second page. When he finished, he set the letter face down on the table and looked at Marcus with an expression that was entirely without hostility and entirely without warmth. The expression of a man who has just been handed a problem he did not create and does not intend to inherit. "Marcus," he said, "I need you to step out for a moment." The room went quiet, the way rooms go quiet when something has already happened, and the people in them are simply the last to know. Diane looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Charles. Marcus's lead attorney looked at the envelope on the table. The Meridian team's general counsel leaned sideways and said something in a very low voice to the man beside him. Marcus stood very still. He was a man who understood deals. He understood timing. He understood the room. He understood in that moment that he was no longer the most powerful person in it, and that whatever was in that envelope, it had not come from nowhere. Raymond's assistant, a woman named Patricia, who had worked for him for 22 years and who had once quietly told Elise that she was the most intelligent person Raymond had ever introduced her to, appeared at Elise's side at 9:41 a.m. with 2 hot chocolates from a cart on the corner and a calm that seemed entirely out of proportion to the situation. "Your father says you can go up now," Patricia said. Elise looked at the building. "The boys, I'll stay with them," Patricia said. She handed a hot chocolate to Noah, who accepted it with both hands and immediate reverence, and crouched down to Caleb's level with the practiced ease of a woman who had raised 3 children of her own. "Go," she said to Elise. "You've waited long enough." The lobby guard, who had turned Elise away at 9:17 a.m., looked at her differently at 9:42 a.m. She did not know what had changed. She suspected the man with the manila folder had something to do with it. She did not ask. She walked to the elevator and pressed 38. The elevator was glass. As it rose, she could see the city assembling itself below, the grid of streets, the silver thread of the East River in the distance, the flat grey sky that pressed down on all of it with the specific indifference of December in New York. She thought about the last time she had been in a room full of powerful people and felt entirely at ease. She was 23, second year of law school, a moot court competition in Griswold Hall. She had argued a Fourth Amendment case so cleanly that the judge, a federal appellate court veteran, had stopped her mid-rebuttal to ask which firm had already recruited her. She had said, "None yet, Your Honor. I'm still deciding what I want to do." He had smiled and said, "Whatever you do, don't waste it." She had, in many people's estimation, wasted it. She had spent 9 years becoming invisible for a man who did not see her. The elevator opened on the 38th floor. The hallway was quiet. Through the glass wall of the conference room, she could see 43 people seated around a long table, all of them looking at a spot near the door. She walked forward. The glass door opened, and every person in the room turned and looked at the woman who was about to make Marcus Hargrove understand what he had thrown away. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The truth had already entered the room. Elise Hargrove walked through the glass door of Conference Room A on the 38th floor at 9:44 a.m., and the room rearranged itself around her presence in the way rooms always rearrange themselves around people who should never have been underestimated. Marcus was standing near the window. He had been asked to step out but had not fully left. He was a man who did not leave rooms, who stood at their edges and held his ground. He saw her, and something moved through his face that was not quite surprise and not quite recognition. Something older than both. The particular look of a man who realizes the person he thought he knew was someone he had never actually met. Charles Whitfield stood. He extended his hand. "Miss Caldwell," he said. "Not Mrs. Hargrove, Ms. Caldwell." A murmur moved through the room. Quick, controlled, the way sound moves through a courtroom when the verdict reads differently than expected. Elise shook Charles's hand. She looked at the room with the particular steadiness of a woman who had spent 9 years watching, listening, and understanding, and who was now in the only room in the world where that education was exactly sufficient. "My name is Elise Caldwell Hargrove," she said. Her voice was level. "I'm the wife of the company's founder and the co-signatory on the First Continental credit line that appears in the offering memorandum, although I was not fully informed of the terms when I signed. I'm also an attorney, though I haven't practiced. And I'm the daughter of Raymond Caldwell, who holds 34% of First Continental Bank's outstanding shares." She paused. "I'm not here to disrupt your transaction. I'm here because this transaction cannot legally close in its current structure, and I think everyone in this room deserves to understand why before they sign anything." The Meridian Group's general counsel had his pen down. Every attorney in the room had their pen down. The only person still holding a pen was Diane Reeves, who was gripping it so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Marcus said her name. "Elise." She looked at him. Just looked. No anger, no contempt. Something more precise than either. "You had the security guard turn me away this morning," she said. "In front of our sons, I want you to remember that you made that choice because every consequence that follows is the direct result of that moment." She had brought her own folder. It was a plain manila folder, the kind you buy at a drugstore for $2, and it contained 22 printed pages that represented 11 days of work at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. while 2 boys slept down the hall. She set it on the conference table without ceremony. "I'd like to walk the room through 3 specific documents," Elise said. Nobody objected. 43 people in $2,000 suits sat and listened to a woman in a grey wool coat explain, in the precise and measured language of someone who had graduated 3rd in her class from Harvard Law, exactly what had been done with their money, their signatures, and their trust. Document 1, the H.R.G. Ventures LLC Incorporation filing, registered in Delaware on September 3rd. She read the signatory names aloud. She noted the date, 3 weeks after Diane Reeves had been added to Marcus's calendar as a full-time attendant. Document 2, the First Continental Credit Agreement bearing Elise's signature, dated August 14th, alongside the wire transfer confirmation showing the $1.8 million flowing directly from the Hargrove Consulting operating account into HRG Ventures LLC 4 business days later. Document 3, the internal Hargrove Consulting accounting entry that described the $2.4 million operating capital transfer as Strategic Reserve Allocation Q4, an entry that had been signed off by Marcus as CFO and that had not been disclosed to either of the firm's two minority partners, both of whom were currently seated in the room and had gone very still. James Kowalski, 47, 12-year partner at Hargrove Consulting, seated 3 chairs from Marcus, set both hands flat on the table. "Marcus," he said. "Just the name, nothing else." The second minority partner, a woman named Priya Anand, had already opened her phone under the table. Elise could see her typing. Marcus said nothing. He was standing near the window looking at Elise with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not in 9 years, not in argument, not in silence, not in any of the hundreds of moments that make up a marriage. He looked like a man standing in a room he had built, watching the ceiling come down. "The acquisition cannot close," the Meridian General Counsel said quietly. "Not today." "No," Charles Whitfield agreed. "It cannot." He looked at Marcus. "I'll need to place a temporary hold on the First Continental accounts pending a review of the credit agreement." He folded his copy of the letter and placed it in his breast pocket. "Effective immediately." The meeting ended at 10:22 a.m. It did not end dramatically. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody made an accusation that was not already contained in the 22 pages on the table. The Meridian Group's chairman, a measured man from Chicago named Robert Lyle, who had not spoken once during Elise's presentation, simply closed his portfolio, looked at his team, and said, "We'll need to reschedule pending legal review." He shook Charles Whitfield's hand. He shook Elise's hand. He did not shake Marcus's hand, that was the whole of it. The room emptied the way rooms empty after something irrevocable, quickly, quietly, without anyone wanting to be the last one standing there. Marcus found Diane in the hallway outside. "The account," he said. His voice was low. "The First Continental account, can you access?" "I already tried," Diane said. She looked at him with something that was not quite fear and not quite calculation. "It's frozen, both accounts." Marcus stood very still. "How long?" "Indefinitely, pending review. That's what it said when I tried the app." She paused. "Marcus, the Meridian deal, I know. If it doesn't close, the operating line from First Continental gets called. The whole $1.8 million. "I know, Diane. And if there's a fraud investigation—" "Stop!" He said it sharply. Too sharply. 2 associates who were walking past in the hallway looked over and kept walking. Diane looked at him for a long moment. She was 29 and very intelligent, and she had made, in the last 8 months, a series of calculations that had seemed sound at the time. She was now running them again with new information. The new information changed the outcome significantly. "I need to call my attorney," she said. "Diane?" "My own attorney, Marcus." She picked up her leather portfolio. "I think you should do the same." She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She got in. Marcus watched the doors close. He stood in the hallway of his own company on the 38th floor of a building on Park Avenue, and for the first time in 11 years of building something from nothing, he did not know what to do next. Downstairs, on the sidewalk, Elise was crouching in front of Caleb, zipping his red coat to the collar. Noah was eating the last cinnamon roll. Patricia was watching them with the quiet expression of a woman who has seen justice happen and found it satisfying. Raymond Caldwell had the power to destroy Marcus Hargrove completely. This was not a metaphor, it was a specific, quantifiable fact. Through Caldwell Capital's holdings, Raymond had leverage over First Continental Bank, 2 of Hargrove Consulting's largest clients, and the investment firm that had been quietly backing Marcus's expansion since 2021. A single series of calls, the kind Raymond made from the same chair in his Greenwich study, where he had been making consequential calls for 40 years, could have dismantled Hargrove Consulting in 72 hours. Clients gone, credit gone, reputation gone. The entire apparatus of Marcus's life reduced to a name in a lawsuit. He did not make those calls. Elise had asked him not to. On the phone from Greenwich, 11 days into her investigation, she had said, "Dad, I need you to help me, but I need you to let me drive." He had been quiet for a long moment. Raymond Caldwell's silences were not empty. They were the specific quiet of a man who was weighing things and arriving at conclusions. "I want him to face consequences," he had finally said. "He will," Elise had said. "Through the courts, through the regulatory process, through the people whose money he mishandled. Not through you, not through me, through what he actually did." Another long silence. "And the boys?" "The boys are mine," Elise said. "I'll handle that." "Elise?" "Dad." "I should have said something in 2014. When I had him investigated, I found things that were minor then. I didn't tell you. I thought you'd choose him anyway, and I didn't want to be the reason you resented me. I was wrong not to say anything. I'm sorry." It was the first time in Elise's memory that her father had used those two words in that order. She had not said it's okay, because it was not entirely okay, and they both knew it. She had said, "Then help me do this right." He had. He had deployed every resource available to him in a single, precise direction. Not destruction, but disclosure. Not annihilation, but accountability. The difference was not mercy. It was a lesson he was teaching Marcus, and perhaps himself. On the afternoon of December 12th, James Kowalski and Priya Anand filed a formal complaint with the New York State Attorney General's office. They did not consult Marcus before filing. They did not warn him. They simply filed, because that was what the 22 pages on the table had made necessary. Diane Reeves was not a villain in the way movies prefer their villains. She had not set out to destroy a family. She had set out to advance herself, a goal so universal it barely qualified as a motive. She was 29, talented, and had spent 6 years watching other people get credit for work she had done. When Marcus Hargrove noticed her, truly noticed her, the way powerful men sometimes notice talented women in a way that feels like recognition, but is really something more complicated. She had told herself she deserved it. She had not thought carefully about what she was stepping into. She had not asked about the wife. She had not asked about the boys. She had told herself these were not her questions to ask. By the afternoon of December 12th, she had an attorney. His name was David Seo, one of the better white-collar defense attorneys in Manhattan, and he had spent 45 minutes on the phone with her going through the documents she had access to and explaining what her legal exposure looked like. She had been a signatory on HRG Ventures, LLC. She had countersigned the Delaware Incorporation. She had deposited the transferred funds. "Did you know about the First Continental credit line?" David had asked. "He told me it was a restructured internal loan," she said. "Did you ask for documentation?" A pause. "No." David was quiet for a moment. "Diane, I want you to think very carefully before you answer this next question. Do you have in your possession any written communication, text, email, document, in which Marcus Hargrove described the source of the funds?" Diane looked at her phone. She had an email, dated October 2nd. Marcus, writing from his personal account, at 11:47 p.m., the First Continental draw came through. Transfer to HRG by end of week. Don't use the firm email for any of this going forward. She forwarded it to David Seo without speaking. He read it. He said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." By 4 p.m., Diane Reeves had cooperated fully with the New York State AG's preliminary inquiry, provided 37 emails and 14 text messages, and accepted a non-prosecution agreement pending final review. Marcus Hargrove did not learn about the non-prosecution agreement until 2 days later. He learned about it from his own attorney, who used a phrase Marcus had never heard directed at himself before. "You have been left fully exposed." The week between December 12th and December 19th moved the way weeks move when everything is coming apart. Not all at once, but in increments, each one smaller than you expected and more final than you could afford. December 13th, First Continental Bank formally froze all accounts associated with Hargrove Consulting, LLC, and HRG Ventures, LLC, pending regulatory review. Marcus's attorney filed an emergency motion to challenge the freeze. The motion was denied. December 14th, Meridian Group issued a formal statement announcing the indefinite postponement of the proposed acquisition of Hargrove Consulting, citing material discrepancies in the offering documentation requiring further review. The statement used no names. It didn't need to. December 15th. Two of Hargrove Consulting's largest clients, a pharmaceutical company and a regional insurance group representing combined annual fees of approximately $4.2 million, sent notices of contract suspension pending the outcome of the regulatory review. December 16th, James Kowalski and Priya Anand formally invoked their rights as minority partners to audit the firm's financials for the preceding 24 months. They retained their own accountants. They also retained their own attorneys. December 17th, the New York Post published a 6-paragraph item in its business section with the headline, "Hargrove Consulting Faces Probe Over Acquisition Financing." It contained no details Marcus could dispute and nothing Raymond's team had planted. It was simply a reporter who had noticed a postponed deal, filed 3 public records requests, and done their job. December 18th, Marcus's personal attorney, a man named Gerald Crane, who had represented him since 2019 and who had reviewed and approved many of the documents now under scrutiny, called Marcus at 8:15 a.m. and said, "I need to withdraw from your representation. I'll send the formal notice today. You need to find new counsel immediately." Marcus did not respond. "Marcus!" Gerald said. "Did you hear me?" "I heard you," Marcus said. The line went quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth," Gerald said, with the careful exhaustion of a man who has seen a great deal and found very little of it surprising, "you had something real. You threw it away." Marcus did not answer. On December 19th, 1 week after the meeting on the 38th floor, Marcus Hargrove's attorneys began preliminary discussions with the New York State Attorney General's office. The word they used quietly and without public fanfare was cooperation. While Marcus's life was coming apart, Elise was putting hers together. She did not do this with drama. She did not do it with vengeance. She did it the way she had done most things in her life. Quietly, methodically, one step at a time, in the gaps between school pickups and bedtimes and the particular 2 a.m. clarity that comes when the apartment is silent and the only sound is the city through the window. She hired an attorney, not her father's attorney, her own, a family law specialist named Catherine Park, who worked out of a small office on West 72nd Street and who had a reputation for being very good at protecting women who had made the mistake of trusting the wrong people with their futures. Catherine filed for divorce on December 13th. She filed simultaneously for a temporary restraining order on the Riverside Drive apartment. Marcus had not been living there, but she wanted it on the record, and for an emergency motion regarding the First Continental credit line documenting the circumstances under which Elise's signature had been obtained. She also filed, quietly and without announcement, a motion to have the line of credit invalidated on the grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation. It was a strong argument. 3 attorneys who reviewed it independently said it was likely to succeed. Elise did not tell Marcus she had filed. She did not tell her father the details. She gave him the information he needed and asked him to stay in his lane, which he did with the particular grace of a man who had spent 40 years getting everything he wanted by being the smartest person in every room, and had recently discovered there was one room he had never actually been invited into. She also did something else. She called the dean of Columbia Law School. She had never fully closed that door. She had taken a leave of absence from the world of law, the way some people take a leave of absence from a city, not because they are finished with it, but because they need to be somewhere else for a while. The dean was a woman who had known Elise's professors at Harvard. They had a 40-minute conversation. 3 days later, Elise received an email with the subject line, "Visiting lecturer position, spring semester, contract negotiations law." She read it twice. Then she opened a new email and typed 4 words. "I'm ready. Thank you." Raymond Caldwell's house in Greenwich was the kind of house that had been built for a large family and had spent 30 years being too quiet. It sat on 4 acres off Round Hill Road. White clapboard, black shutters, a front porch that looked south toward Long Island Sound on clear days. Elise had grown up in it. She had spent the first 18 years of her life moving through its rooms, feeling like a guest in a museum that displayed other people's ideas about who she should become. She arrived on Christmas Eve with Noah and Caleb and 3 bags because they had nowhere else to be. Raymond was standing on the porch when the car pulled into the driveway. He was wearing a Barber jacket and holding a mug of coffee and looking older than she remembered, or perhaps more honest about his age, which is a different thing entirely. Noah got out of the car first and ran across the gravel at the specific speed of a 7-year-old who has been in a car for 90 minutes. Raymond set down his mug and opened his arms, and Noah ran directly into them without hesitation, without ceremony, without any of the self-consciousness that adults bring to reunion. Raymond Caldwell held his grandson and looked at his daughter over the boy's head, and his expression was not a powerful man's expression. It was a father's. "I put the tree up," he said. "Patricia helped. It's a little uneven." "It's fine," Elise said. "I don't know what boys eat. Patricia bought everything. There might be too much food." "That's fine too." He put Caleb down and looked at her. "Are you all right?" She thought about the question. She thought about the kitchen at 2 a.m. and the 47 pages in the lobby at 9:17, and the elevator rising through the December sky and the sound of 43 people going quiet. "I'm getting there," she said. It was honest. It was also the most optimistic sentence she had spoken in 4 months. They went inside. The house smelled like pine and something Patricia had put in the oven. Caleb immediately located the Christmas tree and stood in front of it with the paper bag. He was still carrying it, still the last cinnamon roll, pressed against his chest like a trophy. That night, after the boys were asleep on the second floor, Raymond and Elise sat in the library with their coffee, and Raymond opened his desk drawer and set a small object on the desk between them. A Patek Philippe watch, the one she had given back to him the week before her wedding. "It's been waiting," he said. Marcus Hargrove, in the end, did not go to prison. The New York State Attorney General's investigation concluded in March of the following year with a civil settlement, $3.2 million in restitution to the firm's minority partners, $1.8 million in repayment to First Continental Bank, and a 5-year prohibition from serving as an officer or director of any registered financial services company. His attorney negotiated the terms over 6 weeks. Marcus signed the agreement on a Tuesday afternoon in a conference room in Lower Manhattan with no fanfare and no press. Hargrove Consulting was dissolved in February. The 41 employees were given 60-day notices and letters of recommendation. James Kowalski and Priya Anand honored those personally, even for the staff who had known nothing. The divorce was finalized in April. Elise received full legal custody of Noah and Caleb. She received the Riverside Drive apartment, which Marcus could not afford to contest given the state of his finances. She received a settlement that her attorney had structured around the documented fraud, which significantly changed the arithmetic in her favor. Marcus moved to a 1-bedroom in Jersey City. He was working again by summer, consulting independently small clients, starting over in the specific way that men who have lost everything built from ambition are sometimes allowed to start over. Not from nothing, because some knowledge is permanent, but from a much smaller room. Diane Reeves returned to law school in January to complete her JD. She sent Elise a letter in February, 3 paragraphs, no excuses, an acknowledgement and an apology. Elise read it twice and did not respond. She did not need to. Marcus Aurelius wrote, in his Meditations, a private journal he kept, not for publication but for himself, to stay honest in a world that rewarded dishonesty. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Elise had not controlled what Marcus did. She had not controlled the 9 years of small erosions, the documents signed in trust, the morning in the lobby with 2 boys and a paper bag of cinnamon rolls. She had controlled one thing, what she did after. She had not exploded. She had not collapsed. She had gone to the kitchen table at 2 a.m. and opened a laptop and begun to read. That is the oldest form of power there is, not the power to destroy what hurt you, the power to understand it so completely that it can never use you again. March 20th. The first official day of spring. Elise Caldwell Hargrove, she had added her maiden name back, hyphenated her choice, her decision, walked into room 204 of Jerome Green Hall at Columbia Law School at 8:55 a.m., carrying a leather satchel, a travel mug of coffee, and the particular composure of a woman who has stopped pretending the world is smaller than she is. 19 second-year law students were seated in a horseshoe configuration around a seminar table. They ranged in age from 24 to 31. They had read her course introduction. A brief bio, 2 sentences which said only, Elise Caldwell Hargrove, Harvard Law, 2014, visiting lecturer, contract negotiations law. One of them, a young woman in the second seat who had clearly done additional research, raised her hand before Elise had set her bag down. Professor Caldwell Hargrove, she said, is it true you turned down Sullivan and Cromwell out of law school? It is, Elise said. Why? Elise set her bag on the chair, picked up a marker, and wrote 3 words on the whiteboard. Read before you sign. That, she said, turning to face the room, is what this course is about. Not the theory of contracts, not the precedents, the practice of understanding exactly what you are agreeing to before you put your name on it. She looked at the student who had asked the question. I turned down Sullivan and Cromwell because I thought I had time. Turns out the education doesn't expire, it just waits. The room was quiet in the productive way rooms go quiet when something true has been said. Noah and Caleb were at school on the Upper West Side. Raymond was in Greenwich, probably in his study, probably on the phone. Patricia had sent a card that said, well done. The Patek Philippe was on Elise's wrist. She opened her notes. She looked at 19 faces that were all somewhere at the beginning of something. Some of them frightened, some of them certain, most of them somewhere in between. "Let's begin," she said. "If this story stayed with you until this moment, if any part of it felt true, then you already know what it's really about. Not revenge, not billionaires, not the courtroom or the conference room or the lobby on a December morning. It's about the moment you stop making yourself smaller for someone who was never going to see you clearly anyway. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and I'll see you inside."